Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, if we want to find a word to describe the economic performance of China, since the transition from the socialist planning economy to a market economy in 1978, the only suitable word would be miracles. Because in 1978, the per capita GDP in China was $155 measured by current purchasing power in 1978. It was less than 1/3 of the average in sub-Saharan African countries. And also in 1979-78, China was an inward-looking country. Its export was only 4.7% of China's GDP at that time, import 4.8% of China's GDP. So the trade combined was only 9.5% of China's GDP. And at that time, 78% of the population in China, their per capita GDP was less than $1.25, and that is below the international poverty line. But since 1979, the GDP growth rate in China averaged 9.7% continuously for 37 years. And the trade expanded at 15.3% per year, also continuously for 37 years. With this growth performance, in 2009, China overtook Japan to be the second largest economy in the world. And in 2010, China overtook Germany to be the largest exporter in the world. In 2013, China overtook the US to be the largest trading country in the world. Trade means import plus export. And in 2014, measured by purchasing power parity, China overtook US to be the largest economy in the world. And in 2015, the per capita GDP in China reached $7,960, and it was about 5 times of the average in sub-Saharan African country. And during this period, 700 million people get out of the poverty. So my talk this morning will try to analyze 3 questions. The first one, why it was possible for China to have such a high growth rate continuously for such a long time. And then my second question is, how come it was impossible for China to have a similar growth performance before 1979? How come China was trapped in poverty for such a long time? And the last question is, how fast China can grow in the futures? Regarding my first question, why it was possible for China to grow at such a high rate for such a long time since 1979, my answer actually is extremely simple. It was because of the latecomers' advantages, or the advantage of backwardness. Because we know economic growth certainly means the continuous improvement in the labor productivities. And for a country to have a continuous improvement in labor productivity, certainly, on the one hand, you need to have a technological innovation on the existing sectors. And on the other hand, you need to have a new emerging sector which have a higher value added. So you can reallocate your resources, labor force, capital, and land from low value added sector to higher value added sectors. This mechanism is the same no matter a country is in the advanced stage or a low income country. But there's a difference between high income country and a developing country. For the high income country like US, like Germany, the technology and also the industrial value added are already on the global frontiers. So for the high-income country to have a technological innovation or industrial upgrading, they will have to invent the technology or the new industries. And certainly we know that invention requires a lot of capital inputs and very risky. And from the historical data we know, for the high-income country, since the end of 19th century to now, the average annual growth rate of high-income country was about 3% per year. And for a developing country, the mechanism for technological innovation and industrial upgrading can have one difference, because the developing country, their technology is on a lower level, their industrial value added is also on a lower level. So in the process of the industrial upgrading or technological innovation, the low-income country can borrow the existing technology from the high-income country, and also imitate the same industry which is mature in the high-income country as a way for industrial upgrading. And this possibility is the so-called the latecomers advantages. If a developing country tap into the potential, certainly they can have a much faster rate of technological innovation and industrial upgrading, and they can grow faster than the high-income country. And from the historical data we know, there are certain economies since the Second World War tap into the potential advantage of backwardness and achieve 7% or more growth rate continuously for 25 or more years. And China became one of those 13 economies after the transition to a market economy in 1979. So my answer to the first question is the advantage of backwardness enabled China to have such a rapid economic performance in the past 37 years. But if the advantage of backwardness was the reason for the growth miracle since 1979, that potential has been there for a century, and how come China did not grow as fast as it was before the 1979? My answer to my second question is also very simple, because Chinese government voluntarily gave up that potential. Because China, started to have a modern economic drive after the socialist government took over in 1949, and it started to develop its economy in the early 1950s. At that time, the goal of the economic development in China was to overtake United Kingdom in 10 years, and to catch up the United States in 15 years. That means that Chinese government wanted to develop the most advanced modern industries immediately after its national building drive in the early 1950s. But those industries in the UK and in the US, China could not easily imitate or borrow for two reasons, because some of those kind of technology industries that are still protected by patent. And so you cannot just imitate and borrow that. And more importantly, many of those kind of industries related to national defense. And so the Chinese government wanted to imitate them, then they could not get the idea, the knowledge from those kind of industries. As a result, China would have to reinvent the wheels by itself. By that, certainly China gave up the potential of the advantage of backwardness. Not only so, those kind of industries were very capital intensive, large scale. But at that time, China was a poor agrarian economy. So that means what? Capital was scarce in China. And so China did not have competitive advantages in those kind of large scale, capital intensive modern industries. And if you went against China's comparative advantages, that means what? Firms in those kind of sectors would not be viable in an open competitive market. And unless the government gave those kind of firms all kind of protection and subsidies, otherwise those kind of firms will not be there. And this kind of protection and subsidies we are always in the form of all kinds of price distortion, artificially suppress the input price like capital, labor cost, and resources cost. And at the same time, to give monopoly right to the firm in those kind of advanced sectors. As a result, there's some kind of misallocation of resources there on the one hand, and those kind of distortion also create rent and rent seeking. As a result, although the advantage of backward as a potential is there, but China gave up those kind of potential and causing all kind of distortion and suppression of incentive. As a result, economic performance was poor. Only after 1979, China started to tap into the potential. In 1979, when the transition started, China adopted a certain kind of dual-track approach. On the one hand, with the recognition of the old industries, they are not viable, they should, without the protection and subsidy, they cannot survive. The Chinese government continued to give the old sectors the transitory protection and subsidies to maintain stability. Unlike the Eastern European countries, former Soviet Union, they remove all those kind of substitution, those kind of protection and subsidies, and causing the collapse of the economy. China continued to provide some kind of transitory protection and subsidy to the old sectors to maintain stability. But equally important, China liberalized the entry to the labor-intensive traditional sectors. Not only liberalized the entry, Chinese government actively facilitate the entry to the new sectors. For example, by building up the special economic zone, industrial park, and so on. And those kind of sectors are labor-intensive, are consistent with China's comparative advantages. And with the government facilitation, they quickly become competitive advantage of Chinese economy. They grow very fast, and they are consistent with China's comparative advantages, and so they can be competitive internationally and contribute to the trade growth in China also. And because the new sectors are so competitive, they accumulate capitals, and they will have industrial upgrading. In the process of industrial upgrading, then China could tap into the potential or advantage of backwardness. So that was the reason why only after the transition to the market economy, China was able to grow so fast, and before that, China was unable to do that. Certainly, the question people concerned now is how long China can maintain this kind of high growth, or how fast China can maintain this kind of high growth. And this is a big issue was because from 2010, from the first quarter of 2010, the economic growth rate in China continued to drop. And the first half of this year, the growth rate was 6.7%. But the downward pressure is still very heavy. And so there's a lot of debate about the growth prospect for China in the coming years. And some people expect the growth in China will continue to drop from now 6.7 down to 6, down to 5. And some people even argue the growth rate in China in the coming years may reach 3% or 4%, like the last summers. And some people even predict Chinese economy, when it slows down, then it can cause the collapse of Chinese economy. But the Chinese government, the growth target for the coming 5 years in the 13th five-year plan is 6.5% and plus. So in the coming years, will China grow at 6.5% or plus, or as some people predict that China's growth rate may continue to drop? I think to answer the question, we need to understand two things. The first one, what is the growth potential in China? And the second one, what is the reason for the continuous deceleration of the growth since 2010? Because it was the first time that China to have such an extended period of deceleration in the economic growth rate. What's the first one? What is the growth potential of China? It very much depends on how large is the advantage of backwardness still there. Because for an economy to maintain high growth, the most important mechanism is the advantage of backwardness. And some people think that China already tapped into the potential of the advantage of backwardness for 37 years, and other countries, when they tap into the potential of the advantage of backwardness, in general, they only had a high growth rate of 20 years or more, but China already 37 years. So people think that the potential is already very small. But from my analysis, the way to analyze the potential of advantage of backwardness does not depend on how long that China has already tapped into that potential. It depends on how large is the technological gap that China today still with the high-income country. And the best way to measure that technological gap is to look into the gap of per capita GDP. Because per capita GDP means the average labor productivity in a country. And the average labor productivity is a proxy for the advancement of technology and value added of industry in a country. And based on this understanding, the statistical data I can use for this analysis was the data released by Angus Madison before he passed away in 2011. And the data was 2008. In 2008, the per capita GDP measured by purchasing power parity in China was 21% of US per capita GDP. And 21% of US per capita GDP was similar to Japan in 1951. In that year, Japan's per capita GDP was 21% of US per capita GDP. It was similar to Singapore in 1967, Taiwan in 1975, and Korea in 1977. And for Japan, from 1951, it maintained 9.2% growth rate, continuous for 20 years. And Singapore, from 1967, maintained 8.6% growth rate continuously for 20 years. Taiwan, from 71 to 95, the average annual growth rate was 8.3%. And for Korea, from 77 to 97, the average annual growth rate was 7.6%. And Japan, Singapore, Taiwan, and Korea were among those 13 economies which reached 7.5% or more continuously for 25 more years. So they tap into the same potential of advantage of backwardness and then realize the growth rate of 7.6% to 9.2% continuously for 20 years. With the same mechanism, if they can realize 7.6% to 9.2% for 20 years, that means there's a potential for China to reach around 8% growth rate for 20 years from 2008 to 2028. And so now we have 2016, so China should have another around 14 years of 8% growth rate, potentially. But if it's potentially for China to grow at 8% for another 14 years, how come China's growth rate continue to drop from the beginning of 2010, and now we still see the growth rate continue to have a downward pressure? I think the growth potential, we look at the advantage of backwardness, it is looking at the supply side. And how fast a growth can be realized also need to look into the demand side. And demand side, we know there are three components. One is export, the other one is investment, the third one is consumption. And for the export, because of the high-income countries has not fully recovered from the 2008 financial crisis, and their household income did not increase much, and also the household need to rebuild their balance sheet. They need to save more as a result. Their consumption growth rate and import growth rate dropped significantly. I mentioned that during the past 37 years, the average annual growth rate of trade was 15.3%. And from the 1979 to 2014, the average annual export growth rate was 16.4%. But because of the slowing down in the global trade, the export growth rate in China reduced significantly. In 2015, the export growth rate was negative 2.8%. And in the first half of this year, the export growth rate was a negative 7.7%. As a result, certainly the growth was affected negatively. That's the export side. And the second, from the investment side. In 2008, when the global financial crisis hit, every country adopted a certain kind of counter-cyclical intervention to support investment. But now, after the 8 years of the crisis, the global economy has not recovered. And the private sector's investment incentive was replaced because the global economy has not recovered. As a result, if the government did not continue to have some kind of support of investment, then the investment growth will drop. And I think that was the second reason for the growth deceleration in China. And I can also use statistical data to support that. In the 11 5-year plan period, from 2006 to 2010, the average annual growth rate of investment in China was 25.5%. And in the 12-year plan period, from 2011 to 2015, the average annual growth rate of investment was 7.7%. And so it's an 8% drop. In 2015, the growth rate of investment in China was only 10%. So you can see significant reduction in the investment as a result, certainly, that the growth will be affected. And under this kind of situation, the only way to support the growth certainly was consumption growth rate. And in China, because of employment rate is still maintained very high, household income continues to grow, and as a result, the consumption growth rate in China is still maintained at about 8%. And that was the reason why the Chinese growth rate was able to maintain around 7%. And my analysis is supported by other countries' evidence, because from 2010, not only the growth rate in China dropped, the growth rate in Russia, in India, in Brazil, those BRIC countries, they also have a similar pattern of deceleration, and to some extent, that deceleration was even sharper than China. Not only the BRIC country, they have a growth deceleration. Similarly, that Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, those high-income, high-performing, export-oriented economies, they also have a similar deceleration from the 2010 to now, and their deceleration was even sharper. And the reason why all this group of economies to have a similar pattern of deceleration, it was because they were all affected by the similar external and cyclical factors. External means the global trade. The global trade has been decelerated. We know that before 2008, the global trade grew at about twice as fast as the global GDP, but after 2008, now the global trade growth rate was lower than the global GDP growth rate. And so every country was affected. And similarly, in 2008, every country adopted certain kind of counter-cyclical intervention, but the global economy has not been recovered yet. And so unless the government continue to have some kind of counter-cyclical intervention, otherwise investment growth rate will also drop. So I think that the reason why China has an 8% growth potential, but after 2010, the growth rate continued to drop, and now the growth rate was lower than the growth potential was because of external and also cyclical issue. And with this understanding, how fast China can grow in the 13 5-year plan period, that is from 2016 to 2020. Will China achieve the growth target that's set up by the Chinese government in the 13 5-year plan, that is 6.5% or more, or like other people to predict, China's growth rate may continue to drop down to 4% or even 3%. Well, then also we need to look at the demand side. Demand side, I do not expect the high-income country to recover quickly. they may encounter the similar situation as Japan to have a very long, sluggish stagnation, just like the secular stagnation that predicted by Larry Summers. So under this kind of situation, if the high-income country could not resume their dynamic growth of around 3% per year, then the export growth rate from China or from other developing countries certainly will be subdued. And so for China to maintain the growth rate will very much depend on the domestic demand growth. And domestic demand growth, there are two components. One is investment, the other one is consumption. From the investment side, I think that there's a lot of room for growth in China. The main reason is that China still has a lot of opportunity for industrial upgrading, even though there are many excess capacity in the existing sectors, like steel, cement, and so on. But they are in the middle range of technologies. So China still has a lot of opportunity for industrial upgrading. I can give one example. In 2015, the import of manufacturing goods from high-income country to China reached 1.2 trillion US dollars. So there's a potential for China to have industrial upgrading, even though the excess capacity exists in many sectors in China. That's one thing. Secondly, China can also further improve its infrastructure. Although the infrastructure in China compared to other developing countries is much better. But most of the improvement in the infrastructure in China in the past is to link one city to another city, one point to another point. That is high-speed train, highway, airport, and port facilities. But inner city infrastructure in China is still very poor, like subway, like sewage, and so on. So China certainly can continue to improve the infrastructure. And the third one is environmental protection. The environmental degradation in the past year means if China wants to improve the environment, China needs to invest in new technology, in green technology. And the fourth one is urbanization. Currently, the urbanization rate in China is about 56% of the population. But we know that in high-income countries, the urbanization rate in general reach 80% or more. So China is still in the process of urbanization. And so when you move the people from the rural area to urban areas, you need to provide housing, you need to provide public infrastructure. Those areas also require investment. So these four areas are all economically and socially, high rate of return areas of investment. And this makes China differ from other high-income countries. Other high-income countries, when they face the recession, certainly, if they want to grow, they also need to make some investment. But in high-income countries, it's very hard to find good investment opportunities. Because for the high-income country, their technology, their industry are on the global frontiers, And currently, they have an excess capacity in their sectors. And under the kind of situation, it's very hard to find new opportunity for investment. But China has plenty of opportunity for investment. And in a high-income country, their urbanization already reached the highest, more than 80%. Their environment is good. Their infrastructure is there, although maybe old, but already there. So, in high-income country, it's not so easy to find good investment opportunities, but China is a developing country, still plenty of good investment opportunities. And if you have good investment opportunities, certainly you also need to have resources to make investment. And for this, China is also in a very good position, because for the government, the accumulated fiscal deficit in China is only about 57% of China's GDP. 57% of China's GDP, combined the central government and local government. And also combined the investment vehicle of the local government, only 57% of the GDP. And we know that many other countries, their fiscal debt, accumulated fiscal debt already exceeding 100%. So China still have a large room to expand the fiscal deficit to support the investment. Not only so, the private saving in China is about 50% of China's GDP. among the highest in the world. So that means the Chinese government can use its fiscal expansion to leverage private sector investment. And the third one is that if you want to make investment, certainly you need to import equipment, raw material, and technology from abroad. And that related to the foreign exchange position. China still have $3.2 trillion of foreign reserve, the highest in the world. So these three areas distinguish China from other developing countries. Other developing countries facing a downturn, certainly like China, they should have many good investment opportunities. But their investment is often constrained by their government fiscal position, or low private savings, or lack of the foreign reserve. But China is not constrained by that. So with this, I think China can maintain reasonably high investment growth rate. And with investment growth rate, jobs will be created, household income will continue to grow, and the consumption will also continue to grow at a reasonably high rate. And with a reasonably high investment growth rate and a consumption growth rate, I think China will be able to maintain 6.5% growth as targeted in the 13th Five-Year Plan for the period of 2016 to 2020. Currently, China's GDP is about 14% of global GDP. So 6.5% of the growth, that means China will contribute about 1 percentage point to the global growth each year. And we know that global growth is around 3%. So China will continue to contribute about 30% to the global growth in the coming years. So let me conclude here. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much, Professor Lin, for your very exciting speech. It enhanced my confidence about the continuous, vibrant economic growth in China in future years. And now I believe that there are many questions from the audience. So let's take some questions from the audience.
Thank you. China isn't the only country with backward advantage. What could be the implication of Chinese experience to other countries, other developing countries, particularly African countries in the world?
Well, other low-income countries certainly also have the advantage of backwardness. And, as I discussed in my, presentation, the potential is there. But whether you will be able to tap into that potential very much depends on your development strategies. If you develop your economy according to your competitive advantages, and then you can turn that into competitiveness, and then you can accumulate capital. In the capital accumulation, you will have industrial upgrading, and in industrial upgrading, you can benefit from the advantage of backwardness. I think the reason why African countries, they did not grow fast as China did in the past 37 years was they were guided by wrong development thinking. Like any other developing country in the 1950s, 1960s, up to 1970s, they wanted to catch up the high-income country immediately. So they want to develop the large-scale modern industries and give up the potential of the advantage of backwardness and also cause all kinds of distortion in the economy. And after the 1980s, they started to be influenced by the Washington Consensus type of reform. They wanted to remove all the distortion, and they advised the government should not intervene in the economy. As a result, the all sector collapsed. But without a government facilitation to improve infrastructure and so on, they cannot grow their economy fast as China did after the 1980s. And so if they had the right ideas, then the African country, as well as the other low-income country, they should be able to grow at 8% to 10% continuously for several decades. And that is my talk yesterday mentioned. If they have the right ideas, then they should be able to duplicate the same success as China in the past 3 decades.
Thank you for your presentation, keynote speech here. We heard this blueprint of China into the future, But since 2010, the Chinese economy, especially regional, the diversified, so the gap between like east and prosperous regions to backward, even in China, for instance, northeast China. So many provinces now entered into difficulties. It's not really can explained by this aggregate like trend. And can China really in the next 5 years to solve those difficulties and the problems facing from those regions?
That's also a good question. You know, even the aggregate growth rate in China has been remarkable in the past 3 decades and plus. But the regional disparity, income disparity in China also widening significantly. The reason for this kind of income disparity and the regional disparity widened substantially during the period of time related to the transition strategies. I mentioned that China adopts some kind of dual-track approach to the transition. On the one hand, continue to protect the old sectors with some kind of transitory protection. And on the other hand, liberalize the entry to the new sectors. Okay. And to protect the old sectors, China retained many kinds of distortion. For example, artificially suppress the interest rate, artificially suppress the prices of raw material and so on. And that kind of suppression has income distribution implications. For example, when you artificially suppress the interest rate, and no matter who can get access to the financial services, they get some kind of subsidies. And we know that the financial structure in China is dominated by the large banks and stock markets. Only large companies can get access to financial services from the large bank or from the stock markets. And they are owned by the rich people. So rich people get some subsidies from this kind of financial services. But who subsidize the rich people? Are the ordinary people from the agricultural household or from the small and medium-sized enterprises. They put the money into the financial system, and the return to them was artificially replaced to subsidize the financial investment for the high-income people. And as a result, certainly, you can see that the income disparity in China continues to widen. And the regional disparity, similarly, because the development of light manufacturing was mainly in a coast area because at the beginning, they have a much better access to the global markets. And you can see a large migration of the internal labor force to the urban area in the coastal provinces. But at the same time, because agriculture continued to be taxed as a way to maintain the distortion in the past. But we know that central part and the western part, their comparative advantages are in agriculture and natural resources, but they are replaced. So as a result, you can see that regional income disparity also widening. And that's how to address the issue. Because the main cause of this kind of income disparity and regional disparity was the distortion, the legacy of the distortion. And the distortion was a necessity in the 1980s, 1990s, because at the time China was still a poor economy and capital was scarce. And so the largest scale strong enterprises, they are capital intensive. Without those kind of protection, they cannot survive. So at that time, the protection to them is a necessity for maintaining stability. But after 37 years of rapid growth, capital in China was not so scarce anymore. In many sectors in the past, they went against China's comparative advantages. Today, they are consistent with China's comparative advantages. And so the continuous protection become unnecessary. And that's the reason why in the third plenary of the 18th Party Congress in 2014, the Chinese government argued for deepening the market-oriented reform. And the idea before that was to remove the remaining distortion in all kinds of factor markets. And I think that if those kind of distortion can be removed, then I think the source of the regional disparity and income disparity will be eliminated, then the growth will contribute to not only dynamic economic growth, but also narrowing the income gap between high income group and low income group, and also between the coastal areas and the hinterland areas.
We have a question from this side.
Okay. Thank you for your interesting speech. China is now in a middle income country. How do you think can China avoid the so-called middle income trap? As you know, World Bank has just released a study showing that from 101 countries 50 years ago, in the same stage as China now, only 13 of these 101 have succeeded in overcoming these middle income trap. From which of these success countries in 13 countries can China learn what to overcome this middle income trap?
Okay, that's a good question. So let's come back to my talk yesterday. The nature of economic growth is a continuous structural transformation in technologies, in industries, in hard infrastructure and soft infrastructure. The so-called income trap, no matter its low income status or middle income status, that means the GDP per capita cannot grow faster than a high income country. We know that GDP per capita in high income country only average grew at about 2% per year, plus population growth. The high income country growth rate is average about 3% per year. So if a developing country want to narrow the income gap with a high income country, they need to grow faster than the high income country. Then how can you grow faster than the high income country? The idea is that you need to have a continuous structural transformation, the technological improvement, the industrial upgrading, and you tap into the potential of advantage of backwardness, it can grow faster than the high income country. And in this process, you also need to improve the institution, improve the infrastructure to accommodate the operation of the industry and so on. So I think if a developing country can continue to support the structural transformation, then they can avoid the income trap. And I think that China is moving in that direction. I think that if China can maintain 6.5% growth in the coming 5 years, very likely by the time of 2020 or 2021, China will be a high-income country. Because we know the threshold for a high-income country is to have a per capita GDP of $12,700. And currently, the GDP in China is already 7,960. And if China, maintains 6.5% growth rate, and we know that the population growth rate in China is about 0.5%. So that means the per capita GDP will increase at 6% per year in the coming 5 or 6 years. And with that growth rate, China will be, the per capita GDP in 2020 will be around $11,000. But if China maintains 6% growth in per capita GDP, and the US is only about 1% or 1.5% growth in the per capita GDP. China's per capita GDP growth rate will be about 4 to 5% higher than the US. And under the kind of situation, certainly, there's a real, there's a possibility, there must be a real appreciation. With a real appreciation, plus this appreciation, I think in 2020 and at least 2021, the per capita GDP in China will be $12,700, and China will be a middle-income country, will be a high-income country by that time.
Okay, thank you very much. And due to time constraint, we will take one last short question.
Thank you, Dr. Lin. I think it's really a very great pleasure to listen to your lecture and speech. I come from Chongqing. You say I'm the representative of Chongqing government, which is the twin sister cities with Düsseldorf. But we are the main Trans-Euro-Asian land bridge operator, because our Vision O, our fast train, come to Duisburg every day. And through this one belt, one road way, I think our city, Chongqing, has got more achievements and successful case from this train. So in the future, maybe I think just now Ms. Lin talked about the three questions about Chinese growth. I think in our experience in Chongqing, we may pay great attention to the structure of our industry. But I think the growth speed, just now you talked about the growth speed, I think we don't need so much faster, run so fast as before, because in the world, even USA, the growth not so fast. If we run so fast, too fast as before, it will bring more questions. For example, the large gap between the rich and the poor. So when I worked and lived here in Germany, I think not so much gap between the rich and the poor. So I hope maybe in the future, Ms. Lin will give some good suggestion to our central government. Thank you.
I'll be very happy to do that.